All right. Welcome everyone to our September webinar on user and group management in the Valt application. I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen right away. My name is Andy Simmons. I'm the Valt education specialist here at IVS. Generally, you find me here teaching something about Valt, but today I'm joined by my friend and colleague, John Lewinski. John is a sales engineer at IVS, which means he helps customers and potential customers as well with his technical expertise. He's also worked extensively in our support department, fielding calls from customers looking to optimize their Valt usage. And this is why he's here with me today, because the content for this webinar especially is relevant today because at the beginning of college semesters, as administrators are looking to enroll students in Valt, make sure that permissions are correct. We often get calls looking for some assistance here. So John, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy.
All right. Before we get started, before we kind of unleash John on you, we'll go through the agenda for the day. But first, you'll notice everybody, as always, you're all muted. But our wonderful Jeanette Lee, she's on the call. She'll be able to answer any questions in the chat. So please, by all means, put your questions in there. Anything that we're not able to get to, we'll give you a call afterwards or reach out to you via email. Either way, we'll get your questions answered regarding anything that you have that you see in the presentation today. I'll start with our agenda by showing you kind of where you can find additional Valt content in our customer wiki, as well as where I'm going to put this recording later on this afternoon once we're done. And we'll talk about the concept of groups in Valt. We'll address, what a group is and when and why a new one should be created. Then we'll talk about various ways that users can actually be created and access Valt. And then similarly, on the other side of things, various ways users can be removed. Should note that a couple things that we will not be addressing today, simply because these tangents will take us a little bit longer than our time allows, are one, what about users who need to be a part of multiple groups, which does happen periodically here, as well as what if we need to switch a user from one group to another, kind of what does that entail? And we can absolutely talk about those things with you, but again, they're not going to be answered on this call. So by all means, give us a call after the webinar. We'd be happy to discuss them further. All right, so first, let's take a look at our wiki. I'm going to close my presentation here. I'm going to go to a demo site of Valt, just to remind you where you can find Valt content, where you can find
Andy, I don't think you're sharing your screen. Sorry.
I'm not sharing my screen. Okay, now can you see my agenda?
Yes.
All right, here's the agenda that I did just go through a moment ago. Cover the wiki, groups, creating users, removing accounts. And we will start with the wiki. So if you go to your instance of Valt and log in, and then click on your profile in the lower left, you'll find the help section. Help gives you a few options to actually contact our support department if you need assistance, but you'll also find the IVS wiki /FAQ. A lot of people on this call actually did register through the wiki itself. We always have our upcoming webinar sitting right here. But if you look under video content, you'll also find all the webinars that we have put on in the past. So clicking into here, you'll see the one that you're in right now. It says register. Soon enough, this will change to watch, just like all the ones we've done in the past say watch. So this is where you'll find this later on if you want to share it with any of your colleagues. Aside from our webinars, there's also videos that go through every single permission within Valt. So if there's something that you want to be able to do or give your users access to they don't currently have, you'll see 1 to 3 minute videos on each permission, as well as new features from both versions 6.3 and 6.4. Okay. So next then we will bring up the man of the hour here, John. I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm sorry, I'm going to open up the presentation. And we'll start out with groups. And John, talk to us a little bit about groups within Valt. Why is this an important concept for us to understand when we're creating access within Valt?
Yeah, absolutely. So within Valt, everything that you're interacting with because you're a user who is inside of a group. A group is just a way to define or segment various components of control, such as the information that you're interacting with, the content, like the video content that you're working with, the level of access that you have to those permissions that Andy was just talking about, and then some of the default behaviors as well. Andy, if you want to go ahead and share my screen here, I could talk about each of those just a little bit more as well. So I have Vault pulled up here, and I have one of the groups opened right now. I'm just looking at administrators. So inside of these groups, these are the various things that you might be changing from group to group. So we have the information templates that we're interacting with. If you have multiple departments at like a university, each group might be interacting with a different subset of information. So psychology is going to collect different information than, say, nursing. We also have comment templates and quick markers, so the information that's going inside of the videos themselves. And then a very big one is video access. Who actually can see each other's videos? You know, if you're a student inside of a group, you might have a very limited access to videos, where if you're an administrator or like a faculty or staff, you might have default access to see way more videos. So that's another reason why you might have groups. The rights themselves, the different features with inside of Vault, what tabs do you have access to? Do you have access to observe and review? Do you have access to delete recordings? Then you actually have the different rooms that you have access to. Like I said, if you have multiple departments, you might have different rooms that each group is actually interacting with. Then if I go down to advanced settings, we have default retention. How long are videos stored within inside of the system before they're automatically deleted? Again, different departments might have different needs for those. The max record duration. How long is a video going to record before it automatically stops? If you've ever done a support training with me before, I always refer to this as like a seatbelt that stops the recording before it goes on too long. Things you're probably not telling the end users. Some other ways that you see the information inside of the system. And then also platform access. What days do people have access to the system? Do you have, most cases we see people have access throughout the entire week and all day, through all times. But we have seen people where they only want certain days of access set up in here. So anytime any of these things might differ for person to person, that is when you might start creating those different groups.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to steal back control of the screen here from you, John.
Perfect.
And let's go ahead and, for those of us that don't kind of eat, sleep, and breathe support calls, help us understand the various ways that users can gain access to Vault. And actually, while you do this, Jeanette, if you don't mind, would you mind dropping that wiki article into the chat? For anybody that needs some definitions of this, there's a nice article that I believe John actually wrote that goes through these kind of in a simpler, with simpler verbiage. But John, in the meantime, talk to us a little bit about the different ways that people can gain access to Vault.
Yeah, so with Inside Vault, we do accommodate 3 different ways of actually authenticating to the application. Going from left to right, the most simple is local accounts. So those are accounts that live solely within inside of the Vault application. That username and password is unique to our app and is not shared anywhere else. If it is shared anywhere else, it's pure coincidence that you've just chosen to use that same information within Vault. That means, creating and deleting them. We're going to dive into that in a little bit, but all of that's inside of Vault. Active Directory, that second one, that is something that you're probably already using if you have access to it at your organization, at an organizational level. This is going to be the type of thing that manages typically your email address. And if you're logging into your computer, those credentials can be shared with our application. We'll talk about some of the advantages of that a little bit later. But we can integrate with existing username and passwords that you're already using. And then single sign-on kind of piggybacks on that as well in some instances. But this allows you basically to have one single source of signing in. So if you've signed into a web browser, to Microsoft or your email, when you go to the Vault application, you'll just type in your username. It's going to see if you've already signed in to one of your other apps. And if you have, it'll just bring you directly into the application. So you don't even have to type in your password. So we have kind of these 3 unique ways that we can connect with either, some of your existing stuff or just create something new specifically just for Vault.
Great. So why don't we dive a little bit more into each one of these? John, we can start with creating local accounts. And if you'd like, I can, again, give you control of the screen so you can show a little bit of this in Vault.
Yeah, absolutely. So just starting with creating local accounts. Creating local accounts is probably the most simple of all of them if you just need an account up and running right here and right there. And he's going to go ahead and share screens here. I'm going to go over just to our settings area. You'll notice we have users and groups. Inside of here, over on the right, there's just an area for us to just click add. And we can click add user. when we're clicking this, this is going to add a local user to the system. Again, it's not adding LDAP or single sign-on accounts. So when I go ahead and click that, it's going to ask me for an account name and some other pieces of information as well. Notice that there's little red asterisks next to some of these fields. Those are the ones that are mandatory for us to fill out. Notice email address actually is not mandatory. So the username can be anything. It doesn't have to be an email. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and put John L. Then I'm going to pick the group that I want to put myself into or another user. Then we can go ahead and set up that password. And then once you go ahead and hit save, your account has been created, and it's just that simple. So now if I were to go into users and groups, of course, say all those password things pop up, it's going to show up right inside of this group. And then, if that's for another user, you'd give them the password, and that person or yourself can just immediately start interacting with Valt.
Okay, John, how about end of the semester, end of the project, end of employment, whatever it might be, with local accounts, how do we remove someone's access, and what does that kind of entail?
Yeah, so even more simple than adding the account, once we want to delete that account, we have a couple different ways. If we're just looking at deleting that one user, we can go find that user in here. Of course, I know I was putting myself in this administrative group. I can just go to that user and then click on the delete button. It's going to ask you if you would like to confirm, and then you could go ahead and hit delete, which in this case I will. And that user has now been deleted. If you go to use that username and password, it's going to tell you that you cannot sign in. And if you wanted to, you actually do have the ability to select multiple users and then delete multiple people at the same time. So if you created, 10, 20 local users and you wanted to delete all of them, you could just select all of those and then use that button down there. Certainly use discretion when using a delete all. You want to make sure you're selecting the right people there.
So one concern that I could see customers having is when I delete a user, what happens to records of theirs, videos they authored, and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. So when a user is deleted in the system, your videos are no longer going to be by default associated with the group that you were originally in. Now, I know we talked about how we're not going to get into switching groups and such, but when you're a deleted user, that user will be put into a kind of a group called deleted users. And it's actually a setting that we can set for if you have access to deleted user records. So if I jump back into the administrators group here, I'm going to scroll down to that video access. And then notice that at the very bottom here, we actually have a separate permission for deleted users. So typically staff or administrators would have access to this deleted users. So the videos remain within the system, but they're just not allocated to that original group. If I actually go in here to look at a review, you'll notice that a lot of the authors right now are blue, indicating that they're active users. I think we have some in here. Yep, we have 2 users that have been deleted. These videos still exist within the system, so we don't have to worry about that. Just know that the only people who see them are the people who have the deleted users access. The way to overwrite that, if other people still need access to those videos, if we actually look at the sharing of that video, we'll still be able to use the existing sharing. So if that video was already shared with the appropriate people, those people will still have that access through this sharing mechanism. If you need to grant sharing access, you could come in here and select either the group or just an individual user who should have access to that recording.
All right, so I'll go ahead and grab control of the screen again here, and we can talk about just kind of put a bow on it and say some of the pros and cons of using local accounts. So
Yep, and I kind of covered some of these as well. With local accounts, they're easy to create and delete, so very helpful for that. If you're using our Beam application, sometimes it can be helpful to have a user that's just called Beam, put it in the admin group and just call it Beam Sync. So that way, if that password ever changes, you know what is going to be impacted by that. The changes are also immediate and noticeable. So if I create an account, it's immediately usable. If I delete it, it's immediately deleted. And there's no need for an external IT team. So if you don't have, a team or Active Directory setup that you can interact with, it's really easy for you to get going right away, especially with small groups and small users. Some of the cons, it's not centralized, so it's not sharing usernames and passwords anywhere else. People will have to remember a username and password, and I'm sure if many of you are managing these systems, I'm sure you've encountered someone who's forgotten their password at some point in time. But it does allow you to change it very easily, which is nice. Like I said, multiple usernames and passwords. And then it's really not as secure. So if you are in like a HIPAA environment, using those local accounts is typically not something that is going to be allowed for you. So it's not typically going to be accessible for something that you can use on a regular basis.
Great. Okay. Let's go into our second way that we can have users created within Vault. And I know for this one, John, you wanted to share your screen one more time. I promise I won't pass back and forth too many times, but we're going to talk a little bit about Active Directory next.
Yeah, absolutely. So while you're sharing my screen, there it is. So Active Directory, like I said, that's going to integrate with the same system that is used for when you're connecting to like your university or other system that's managing all of your accounts. This will need some setup from a technical team. So I'm just going to briefly jump into that just to show you where it exists. But we do have an area for servers and services. And then there's specifically in the top middle an LDAP area. And then you'll notice we have some of our Active Directory servers that we're connecting to. And then we're having to actually connect to that so we can synchronize with the existing groups outside of our system. Once we're going in here, I can go into users and groups, and then we have this import area. This is where we're going to be managing everything from an Active Directory standpoint. Again, this is stuff that we'd be talking to your IT team about. And there's kind of two ways to add users and add users to the system. The first one that I want to talk about is for sync schedules. So this is going to be like a one-to-one correlation. Anything that is inside of your Active Directory setup is going to mimic what is inside of the Vault setup. So if you have a Vault faculty group in Active Directory, we're going to match that exactly over in our system. So in this case here, I have two, one for installers and one for main users. Under main users, really just giving this little bubble a name. And then you'll see this little bind script. Basically what this is just a subset of folders inside of your Active Directory that points to a very specific group of people. So you'll notice I just have users and admin services. So this is that one-to-one correlation. Anyone who is in this folder on your end, every 5 minutes is going to synchronize to our application as that one-to-one mirror. So if you add someone to that group, within 5 minutes, you'll actually see that within side of our system. And you'll notice Andy's also going to bring this up here. In this little picture, on the left and right, you'll notice we have those 6 people. They were added in Active Directory. Within that 5 minutes, they're also then added to our Vault group. So any group that you want inside of Vault will need that group to exist in Active Directory. The second method that I want to talk about is actually still connecting to the Active Directory server, but you do have the ability to import individual users. So if you have a large class of 100 students and you want that to be synchronized, from semester to semester, that's really good for adding the students that way. But if you just have one faculty member that you don't want to create a whole Active Directory group for, you do have the ability to just search for their name inside of your Active Directory and then import them into our application on just a user by user basis. So we do kind of have those two methods for adding those users. And once they are added to the system, with similar to the local accounts, they can immediately sign in once that account is created.
That's great. Let's talk then about if we're using Active Directory to create users at the end of the semester, at the end of employment, whatever it might be, how do we remove them?
Yep, so removing accounts is going to be kind of dependent on how they were added. So we have those two scenarios, we're syncing them or we're manually importing kind of one by one. Under that first scenario where we're syncing and we're doing that one-to-one correlation, in this diagram that you can kind of see on the screen, we have the Vault group and the Active Directory group. We removed person 2 and we removed person 5. Once we removed those 2 people from Active Directory on the technical side, within 5 minutes, that change will be reflected within the Vault application and they will be removed. That second scenario where we manually imported someone, they're not attached to a sync schedule. So the only way for that user to be removed would for you to then actually locate that individual and then delete their account very similarly, actually exactly similarly to how we did it for the local account.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you, John. I think that brings us then to our third and final way for users to be granted access. But oh, I'm sorry. Let's take one step back, tie a bow on Active Directory. Let's talk some of the pros and cons here.
Absolutely. So a lot more complicated than the local accounts. But for the pros, less usernames and passwords to remember. Like I said, since it's the same username and password that you're probably logging into your computer, it should be a lot easier for people to remember what that username and password is. So the chances of someone forgetting their password, not gone completely, but hopefully reduced. One of the nice things is that the changes that are made in Active Directory are reflected inside of Vault. So you have a very good understanding if you're looking at Active Directory that you know what's going to be in Vault, especially if you have that sync set up. Higher level of security, like I said, local accounts, those are not really good, especially if you're dealing with like a HIPAA environment or just a security team that wants your system to be highly secure. Active Directory is definitely a good way to add a higher security level to that. And then Active Directory is really flexible, like I said. So we have the ability to synchronize large groups of people, but also manually import individuals on a per user basis. So you can kind of really flexibly interact with that. Some of the downsides, you do need an IT team to help you set this up, or you need to have access to Active Directory. So it takes some configuration on that front. And when you want to make changes, if you're using that sync, you'll have to reach out to the IT team to add those users on the Active Directory side for those changes to propagate. And if you're not doing that and you're manually importing people, there's kind of a low visibility on the difference between the users that are imported versus the ones that are individually synced. So I have seen that in my support days where people would, do a sync at the beginning, but then they would need, to move quickly to add people. But now you've mixed the sync with the import, and now it's kind of all out of whack, and there's not really a good way to identify who should still be there and who should not be there, so that can sometimes be confusing for people.
Gotcha. Okay. So then now let's talk about the third and final way that users might be granted access. Talk to us a little bit about single sign-on, John.
Yeah, so single sign-on. So single sign-on is going to be kind of similar, where you're going to be interacting with the same username and passwords that you're already using. The main difference here is we're not doing a sync. So with Active Directory, whatever was showing in Active Directory is immediately or within 5 minutes is going to be shown inside of Vault. The creation for single sign-on users is going to be what we call just-in-time provisioning, or JIT provisioning. That means that the user account is not going to be evaluated until that person is actually signing in. So inside of the graphic here, we have persons 1 through 6 that we created on the single sign-on side and our identity provider. We've put all 6 people in there, but you'll notice on the left in the Vault group, person 1 is the only person that shows up in there. To us, that means that person 1 is the only person who has yet to sign in. So in Vault, that's the only account that you can actually see. That doesn't mean that persons 2 through 6 can't sign in. That just means that if you're an administrator, you're just not going to see them in Vault at that time. From the end user's perspective, those users are going to sign in and their accounts will be created at that time. So the user experience is not different. They're not going to know that their account wasn't created. And really, this is probably most noticeable at the beginning of a semester. If you have videos that you want to share with new students, but the students have not signed in yet, if you go to that sharing tab, that student's name is not going to be populated in that list. So you won't actually be able to share that video until they sign in for the first time. So just know that it's happening at the time of sign in.
Okay. So again, that would be creating the account by attempting to sign in. So now let's go to the other end one more time. Talk about what happens at the end of the semester, at the end of employment, at the end of the project, whatever it might be. How are users removed when we have single sign-on going?
Absolutely. So with that just-in-time provisioning that I was talking about, the user accounts are only going to be deleted automatically at the time that they go to sign in. So they're not going to be deleted unless their account has been removed from the identity provider side, and then they go to try to sign in. They would go to try to sign in, and it would then delete their account. Now, you might catch this is if they're already removed from the identity provider side, there's probably a chance that they're not going to sign in. So those accounts are probably not actually going to be deleted. And you'll kind of see that in the graphic that I have here, we still
Sorry.
have, this is a new semester. Person 1 through 6 were from that previous semester. We now have 7 through 10 that we want populated in here. You'll see at the bottom of that list, person 9 already signed in, so they're showing up in Vault. The other people have not. And persons 1 through 6 have not signed in after their accounts were deprovisioned, so they're still inside of the Vault accounts. Now, if you want, you could actually go to the Vault group, and similar, like I said, you could select a large group of people and automatically delete them. That would probably be your best bet, is to go into Vault and clear out that group of students. If there are people in that group that just should still have access, they will go to sign in, their account was deleted, but if they sign in, it will basically recreate their account or reestablish their account as it was. So if you delete them, their account will still be fine, but you probably will need to manually delete them for you to actually remove people with single sign-on.
Gotcha. So signing in the first time will create the account. If you attempt to sign in once you're no longer in the SSO group, it will delete your account. Otherwise, if we see 1 through 6 here, but they're not here, they won't be able to access it again. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so with that in mind then, let's talk some of the pros and cons of single sign-on.
Yeah. So again, like Active Directory or LDAP accounts, less usernames and passwords to remember. So you can still piggyback off of the existing credentials that people are already familiar with. One of the great things with single sign-on is it can work with multi-factor authentication. That's not something that's managed on the Vault side. That would be managed on the identity provider side, which is just within inside of your organization. So if your organization has multi-factor authentication enabled and set up through single sign-on, it will work over there. And here as well, which is great, especially for those HIPAA environments where people would, really require multi-factor authentication internally. And it only requires one sign-in. So like I said before, if you're already signed in to your email address in your web browser, when you go to type in your username, it'll just see that you have that session already enabled, and it'll just log you in. Even if you type in your username incorrectly, it's still going to see that single sign-on session and just log you in, which is really helpful for just getting that quick access. Some of the cons: this requires the most configuration of the 3 methods that we've been talking about. So having an IT team that you can heavily rely on to do all of the management on that identity provider side is very important. You can't import people through single sign-on. It has to be created with a link, and everything has to be managed on the identity provider side. And changes only occur when someone signs in. So that, again, can be difficult. Like I said, if it's deleted from the identity provider side, that's not necessarily going to reflect in Vault until that person signs in. And, the chances of someone signing in after they've been deprovisioned is pretty low. So, you're going to see a lot of accounts that you might not expect to see in there. But if you're cleaning those out at the end of the semester, that's certainly going to help things down the line. And then the central management outside of Vault is not always desired. So I've ran into it many times where someone wants a single sign-on for their secure environment, but their IT team is very hands-off, and they say, hey, we'll set this up for you, but we're not managing this from semester to semester. And that can really be a pinpoint when you need to be able to, on the fly, add and remove users without going through that third party, that IT team. So that can kind of be a downside. Something we're not talking about inside of this presentation, but we do have a way to hybrid use Active Directory for creating and deleting accounts, but then use single sign-on as the authentication. If that's something that is certainly interesting to you, reaching out to our support team is definitely going to be a really great resource for looking into that. But yeah, those are definitely some of the pros and cons to the single sign-on side. A lot more complex.
The exact question I was going to ask is, can we use these in conjunction with one another? You mentioned local accounts being used in conjunction with Active Directory, but we can use single sign-on and Active Directory in conjunction. Great.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so we can use the Active Directory for creating and deleting, and then single sign-on as well, just for the authentication. And there is a way to actually have all 3 accounts living inside of one ecosystem. So another thing that can be really helpful is if you're using a local account for just a test account. I've talked about this in a previous webinar, but if you want to see how students are interacting with the system, you want some type of test account to actually be able to place into that group, so you could log in and actually see if the permissions that you set match your expectations with what they should be doing. You might just create a local account to place in the students group, sign in with it, see what's going on, but your primary daily driver is actually a local, or is an LDAP account or a single sign-on account. So you can kind of interact and have multiple within inside of the same system. So you're not limited to just using one.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, John, for your time and your expertise. If anyone on the call today has follow-up questions, or you need assistance with anything you've seen today, please give us a call, or you could always email support@ipivs.com. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have regarding any of these 3 items that you saw. Or you can go to our customer wiki and schedule a session with you can go to the help section within Valt, schedule a session with a support rep. But also feel free to go to the wiki later on once this has been uploaded. If you want to watch this again or share it with a colleague, I'll probably clean it up so they don't know that I made mistakes in the beginning. But I should have it up by the end of the day today if you'd like to take a look again. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Bye, everyone.